To formally introduce tonight's speaker, I'd like to invite Professor of Art History, Dr. Damon Willick, to offer a formal introduction. Can you please help me welcome Dr. Damon Willick?
Yes, so I'm here to formally introduce Nicole Woods. The idea of a formal introduction to me seems sort of opposite of what I think Alison Knowles' work demands, performing chants. And so in preparation for tonight, I consulted, or I played with the oblique strategies. Brian Eno created these cards in 1975 with an artist, Peter Schmidt, and they were oblique strategies on how to be creative. And so I think there's some 200 of them. With ideas to spur other ideas. So I consulted these cards, and the first card I drew was, let me make sure I have this right, it said, tape your mouth. So I figured I couldn't give an informal introduction by taping my mouth, so then I consulted a second card, and it said, take a break. Okay, so the third card said Ghost Echoes, and that's a card that made me think about Nicole and my dissertation advisors, or both of our dissertation advisor, was Dr. Cecile Whiting, who was an Americanist. She was at UCLA when I was a graduate student, and Nicole was an undergraduate, and she was actually a student in one of my discussion sections. So I was a teaching assistant, and Nicole Woods was, I don't know what year you were in, maybe a sophomore or junior?
Yeah, sophomore.
Sophomore or junior. So this Ghost Echoes, and I was thinking about how Cecile Whiting, as a graduate advisor, could not have been more generous. And she treated her graduate students with respect. She asked that we work hard like every other graduate advisor that I had, but she was unique. Dr. Cecile Whiting really urged us to lead with teaching, right? She, I think, embodied the ideal of the teacher-scholar, which leads me to Nicole Woods, because Nicole Woods is truly a master professor, and we're so lucky to have her here. Her accomplishments are many, and I wrote some of them down, and I'm sure that you've seen the advertisements for tonight's lecture, and you know that she's been a fellow at CASVA, which is one of the most esteemed foundations coming out of the Smithsonian Museum.
National Gallery.
The National Gallery, but you're also a Smithsonian Fellow.
In February.
In February. The Andy Warhol Foundation has bestowed a fellowship as well, the Terra Foundation, and many others. I'm sure I'm forgetting others. In this book that's forthcoming in February, Performing Chants, The Art of Alison Knowles in and Out of Fluxus, will be the first monograph on the artist, an understudied artist, but an artist who has incredible influence on contemporary art, and I think an artist that we can turn to in today's tumultuous times. So that is my informal introduction, and I really look forward to tonight's talk. So thank you.
Oh wow, thank you so much for that. There you are. For that introduction, David. I'm definitely a little teary-eyed when I think about our time together at UCLA. Damon was the person I learned to be a teacher from, and Cecile Whiting as well. I'm a little choked up this evening too, because this is the very first book event to kick off this exciting tour of work around Alison. So thank you, Ellen, thank you, Kristen, my amazing department chair. Thank you, John and Chan and Ray. Thank you to my students who always give me so much to think about in classes, especially this semester. They've been incredibly inquisitive and forthcoming with what they don't understand. And I'm so excited to figure out together, think through this together. And so the topics at hand in my classroom, and also, of course, tonight too. This book is long in coming. I started out interviewing Alison 20 years ago, I realized. And Alison was, I say, and sadly in the past tense because she just passed. Alison was the most generous, and this is when I'll get choked up because she's so amazing. And I'm writing a piece for her right now. It's just all too much. In any case, she was the most generous, kind, exceptional interlocutor, where you would come to her studio loft where she's pictured here a few years ago for a featured story, the New York Times, and they reran the photo for her official obituary. And I know the studio so well, like my own sort of home. It was a place where she made salads and tuna fish lunches, which will become important in just a little bit, where she always offered tea, where when she was done talking, she would just stop talking to me. And she would just close her eyes and would be quiet for a little bit, and I would turn my recordings off and give her space to breathe and to be a person and a subject, not an object. And that was a really important lesson for me that Cecile Whiting and Damon and a lot of people that I came to know along this path to writing this book, a long gestation of dissertating, certainly, but also because Alison was a pioneering artist of genres that did not exist until the 1960s. Performance, installation, conceptual art, sound art, computational poetry. I'm going to show you examples of everything that I'm describing right now. Food art, that she, as a woman artist, like many, unfortunately, women artists don't get recognized. They don't get their flowers until much, much later in life. And she finally has gotten her flowers, not just from this book, but from the exhibition that's right now touring Europe by Alison Knowles, which I have been a part of since the beginning. It opened, it was delayed by COVID, as was my book, and so this entire project to me feels like such a snapshot of my life in so many different ways, and of my scholarship and certainly of my teaching. So I want to just use tonight as a way to talk about the book, but also just talk about the themes of her practice. I'm especially interested in students' feedback about this work because some of it's really difficult. Not difficult to look at, but sometimes it's boring. Sometimes it's too almost intellectual. And she understood that intimately, and she started to expand her practice into the domestic everyday. And what also changed for her was becoming a mother. And that is also something that's very deeply felt by me. And lots of times in our conversations when she would be standing there or sitting there, she would take something off the wall and just show it to me. Or she'd walk me around her loft and show me pictures of her daughters, who by then were in their 40s and 50s, and she was still so proud of them. She would ask me about mine, and we just became this incredible sort of little tight-knit family. And I'm so grateful for her. Now, she lived a long time. She died at 92 last month, which happens to be the 14th anniversary of my dad's passing on the same exact day, so it's been a little bit of a rough time. But we knew that it was coming for quite a while, and what I wanted to, in this particular book, she could write 4 volumes on her life. You could start with, I believe it's, in my mind, the way I understand it, she's got 3 major phases, and I've decided, because when I was writing on her and I was writing on Fluxus, this very strange group that I'll describe to you of international artists and musicians and poets who came together in Wiesbaden, Germany, of all places, in the early 60s, from all sorts of corners of the world to come to sort of find their roots and find community. And they stayed on as working artists together for a very long time. But so she starts there. That's sort of the first real phase after her painterly life as an abstract expressionist painter. And then there's this work in the 60s that I'll show you that's environmentally scaled, and there's incredible sculptures, and it's about her life and her working activities in a number of different ways. And then there's the third part, which is prints, cyanotypes. She's actually trained as a printmaker originally, and so she was one of only 2 graduating women artists at Pratt Institute in 1956. And when I went to see her one more time in early October, I actually found an eBay yearbook from that year and gave it to her as a gift. And she opened it, and we found her picture, and it was very sweet. She said, "I used to look like that." And it was so wonderful. And the other thing that was wonderful about that experience was that my press gave her one of these, which is an advanced copy. It's an unedited proof. And her daughters were with her every moment, and her family to the end. And when I visited her over a weekend, we sat and we flipped through all of these pictures together. And she remembered, she was very weak, but she would point to things, and I remember that. And what I loved about Alison the most, and I can pass this around, is that Alison always talked about other people. She had this incredible non-ego for an artist and a creator of her capacity. And she would say, oh, remember when Jackson McLeod did this, or John Cage taught me that. Mm-hmm. And it always turned to other people. I remember when my girls were playing in the sculptures. And that's always meant so much to me. And I'm going to describe why I picked this cover when we get to it, but I'll just kind of spin it around if you'd like to just flip through it. I'm an art historian, which means I have a crutch of images. It's my crutch. In other words, I have a ton of images. I might get through them all. I might not get through them all. But in any case, back to the 3 stages, I thought I have to finish this dissertation at some point. I can't keep going. But because she was a woman artist who didn't have the capacity to save things, she had a studio, loft, an apartment, but she didn't have massive buildings like Klaus Oldenburg. She didn't have the money and the capacity to save every single scrap for a historian like me to go tracing after someday. So what happened was I had to figure out, okay, a snapshot in time, late 1950s through the mid-1970s. Okay, now I'll get to the other stuff someday. She's the gift that keeps on giving, truly. And so this is, you're seeing the table of contents, and that's essentially what it does. It's thematic and it's chronological, mostly. And I just try to trace her. I try to put her in the history books. I mean, we know a lot about her, but we don't know a lot about her. And what I learned along the way was that I had to learn everything that was most critical to her practice through others, because she gave things away all the time. So I had to go through George Brecht's letters to find the one moment where she actually describes a work that I couldn't understand looking through other things. I've spent years at the Getty Research Library going through every Fluxus file I could possibly go through. Dick Hagan's papers are scattered: Washington, D.C., Chicago, Los Angeles, and Stuttgart. I went to all of those places multiple times because I was very deeply influenced, not just by Cecile Whiting, but also Brandon Joseph, who was my other dissertation advisor. And he is an art historian who practices something we call mole archaeology, where you sort of go all the way down in a subject. You sort of don't stay on the surface, you do everything. And it almost felt forensic in a certain kind of way. Like I was matching, her handwriting against other people's handwritings. But that also meant going to, Nam June Paik and all of these people in her life that meant so much to her. So that's what this book tries to do. It tries to put, for the first time, in depth, archival depth in the historical record, her life, what it meant, what her work meant, and what it means truly as we keep going. The legacy, not just of Fluxus, but certainly of all sorts of forms that she generated, truly. Alison was born in 1933 in New York City, and her father was a professor of Spanish-English relations. He was one of the first translators of Don Quixote. And so she grew up in this incredibly interesting environment of not just literature and intellectual engagement, but of episodic novels, very particular kind of literature, right? Episodic novels, and he would read to her every night, and she drew him Walt Disney figures as her sort of gift when they came home. They would exchange things. And what I found about women from this period is that having parents, but particularly fathers, who were supportive, made it possible for them to actually pursue art careers. This is true of Helen Frankenthaler, this is true of Joan Mitchell, this is true of many, many, Grace Hardigan, many artists of this generation, and a little bit later, who needed the authority, if you will, of the patriarchy to pursue something as wild, right? as making. So what I love about one of her very first students, and this is what I mean by the forensic stuff, going to Pratt Institute, finding her student work, and the student work that I was the most struck by was ad lib. So she was a graphic arts major, designer, and illustration and painting. And this is one of her senior projects. She had a page in their student-run newspaper called Ad Lib, and she chose a Carl Sandburg poem that she had seen on a museum placard, the Museum of Modern Art for the Family of Man show in 1955. So you have all of these connections to like her childhood and her father and her parents in general, and her brother who was a fisherman who she loved deeply, and I'll talk about him in a little bit. But what you can see here is you're not sure exactly what it is. Is it a crouching figure? Is it an abstract series of lines? Is it calligraphic? And what I realized about Alison is this pairing of imagery and text will be a foundational theme throughout her life, and something that I call in the book visual poetry. So she's a visual poet to me in a number of different ways. This is a fantastic picture that I found at the Getty in Dick Higgins' papers. Dick Higgins is her husband. I'll talk about him too. This is her in 1959 in her loft on Canal Street and Broadway, and she was, young and excited and very much interested in pursuing a life of art, and she knew that meant breaking certain boundaries. So she married a man that she knew was gay. She knew that she would not be expected to have a certain kind of, traditional life. They had an incredible partnership. They produced daughters. They had amazing companionship, and they were together, and then broke up, and they got back together, and then had this really incredible open marriage at the end of their life too. And I think that also in itself is such a pioneering gesture of living life exactly as you want to live it, and not living by the boundaries of art making that was expected at the time, which is abstract expressionist painting. You kind of see that in the background. So this is basically introduction in chapter 1, where I describe like who she is, where she came from, why she married Dick, what was happening in her life, and how it produced so many different and amazing possibilities. These are 2 incredible archival finds, one at the Somme Archive in Stuttgart, and the Somme Archive, let me just briefly say, was the collection of a West German dentist who used to just go to exhibitions, and he went to performances, and Fluxus has always been very popular in Western Europe, especially in Central Europe and Germany, and he bought all this stuff when when American collectors and museums were not buying their work at all. So that's one very important, huge silkscreen painting that predates Warhol, that predates Robert Rauschenberg in some sense, certain capacities. And what I was so struck by was not just sort of like chaotic imagery. These are pasted up, blown, sort of major camera work pieces when she was working as a commercial designer, sometimes for Air France. And she basically went to work, that was her day job, she painted at night. And her day job allowed her, in this case, to take cast-offs, to take stuff that was just on the studio floors and make art out of them. This is important because collage is really critical to her practice too. So you have commercial design, massively scaled paintings like abstract expressionism normally is, and then you have this very sweet work that I found in an unmarked folder at the University of Iowa's special collections. And I was like, whoa, hold on, I know what this is. This is an Alison work. And I turned it around, and it was confirmed by the curator there at the time, Joyce Sy. Untitled triptych, and really what she was working out in the late 50s, early 60s was this push-pull. Am I a painter? Am I a commercial artist? Am I gonna have a particular kind of career that has stability, like commercial art or design, or am I gonna pursue something else? And she started to have more and more connections at that time. She and Dick Higgins did with happenings and John Cage and Yoko Ono and experimental musicians, and she just went in that direction completely, which is pretty amazing for the era. What did that manifest? This is chapter 2 of the book, Fluxus. These are some documentary photographs of Alison performing with her Fluxus male colleagues between 1962 and 1965, as you can see. And what you're looking at is this new model of art making that's collaborative, that's performative, it's iterative, it's live, and it's also possible for any of us to perform it at some other point or in that moment. So you see in the middle, which is one of my favorite works of hers, called Newspaper Music. And it calls for at least 5 people that read 5 different languages. And they're reading newspapers in those languages, but she's conducting their cadences at the same time. So you can hear the rise and fall of the dialects, of the accents, of the sort of cacophony of different ways that we communicate with each other. And that I also realized was a key theme in her work, which is communication. How do I affect my audience? How do I not work, how does my work not just live on a wall in a museum, how does it live in the space that we are? And that's going to be a crucial shift in her practice too. They did lots of different things during these new music concerts of Fluxus. But I'm going to get back to those in just a second. You can see her in a number of different, she's the only woman. She's the only founding woman artist of Fluxus. She will soon be joined by Yoko Ono, Shigeko Kubota, Miko Shiomi, Kate Millett, a lot of adjacent people too, but that's to come when they return to New York. Where are they right now? They're in Wiesbaden, Germany, and they're on a tour for over a year of European capitals, performing wherever they can, including a church in Copenhagen, which is her next stop in a retrospective, by the way. It's a Nikolai Kirke Church is where this work is here. Her European tour actually kicked off in Wiesbaden. Now, Wiesbaden is going to be really important to us, but as sort of trying to tell the story of Fluxus, I'm not the only Fluxus scholar. By the time I finished my dissertation, there's so many Fluxus scholars and so much material out there, and they were all dealing with them as a group, and I didn't want to do that. I thought it would sort of not serve her if I didn't think about like her work inside of Fluxus and out of it, which is how I came to my eventual title. But all of them shared one mentor in particular. Marcel Duchamp was certainly a legacy and an important privilege, capacity for them to know him in New York when he was, he finally left Europe for good during World War II. But that's a whole other story. But I just want to briefly say something about John Cage. So John Cage was an American experimental composer who decided, he went to UCLA, he was born in Los Angeles, he decided at a certain point in his career that he didn't want to do the 12-note scale anymore. He didn't want to pursue the traditional modes of making music, of writing music anymore. And he decided to do something very, very different, which was instead of using your traditional music notes on traditional music paper, that he would write in columns instead, and that the structuring device are timed intervals. So 1 minute of a flute playing, 2 minutes of brass or another brass or a percussive instrument, piano, etc. And then as he started to work through these ideas, and he's influenced by a lot of other people, which is again a longer story, he started to think about, well, let's get to the guts of like music materiality, the instruments. So he started lifting up the piano lids and messing with its inner guts, right? Instead of putting bolts and rubber bands and clips, and then in these timed intervals, he would play the keys that way, and thus creating noise, certainly, but also creating another way for us to think about noise as an aesthetic that is producing a different kind of creativity instead of, everything has to have a beginning, a middle, and a crescendo. Like to him, that was over. Like that sort of European male, or that male certainly, model was over, and he just didn't want to do that. And because he lived and worked in New York mostly, he knew all these artists who were just coming up, who were leaving their abstract expressionist lives behind for the most part, and they were organizing themselves around conceptual ideas, language, musical notes turned into sentences. So an entire musical program, if you will, would be a simple sentence. And then you could decide how you would play that sentence, for instance. And I have here, if you'd like to flip through it, this is a very important compendium, an anthology of chance operations. This is an original. I bought it on eBay a long time ago. Concept art, meaningless work, natural disasters, indeterminacy. You see this incredibly long title. And it's basically a collection of artists who were in his orbit in New York who decided that they also wanted to pursue conceptual art and different ideas, and they wanted to shake up either music, poetry, visual art, or all of them. Dance, too, is one of them. It's also interactive. I come with props. Improvisation becomes so critical. The ingredient is chance. This is something that Cage taught his students when he was a teacher at the New School for Social Research in the late 1950s, and he said everything is music. So outside, cars honking, listening to the birds chirping. I'm often reminded of Cage when I'm taking my long walks along the beach and listening to the ocean crash and thinking about all sorts of different things, and I'm sort of trying to be in the present moment. This is part of the I Ching relationship that he had with that beautiful book of ancient changes that I can talk about in the Q&A a little bit. So all of this is leading to this, this formation of an entire cast of people from Japan, from Western Europe, from North America, from all over the place, in some case later on, South America. And essentially what they decided to do, this group of people in very different ways, not just came together as a community of makers, but they decided that if they wrote things out, that others could perform them in perpetuity. And that's what I mean by it's iterative, it's generative work. All of these word events or compositions for word events will exist after all of them are gone, and Alison was the last of the original Fluxus artists to pass. Their work lives on, of course art lives on anyway, but their work lives on in a kind of intimate way that we can take it with us, and I'll describe what that means when it comes to her in just a minute. Composition number 60, or 1960, number 7, to be held for a long time. What's to be held? Right? Like a baby? Your breath? Your hopes? There's all sorts of ways we can read these conceptual scores, and what they decided to do was make them into performance pieces that they would conduct together. I have a very short video to show you. This is from German television that showed up. Like, what are these people doing here? And why are they making work? And you have to watch it so you can see what I mean and what they were doing when they first showed up with these spotting in 62.
Einen Kommentar geritzt. Eine Kritik zu den Festspielen neuester Musik. Man beachte,
Festival of
neuester.
Newest Music.
Neu klänge viel zu altmodisch. Das hier sind die Interpreten. Und es handelt sich keineswegs um Vorschusslorbeeren, die sie sich selbst spenden. Es handelt sich bereits um das erste Werk des Abends. Silenzium.
That's a word. Fucking.
Das Publikum weiß nicht zurecht. Muss man ernst bleiben? Darf man schmunzeln?
This fellow's really unhappy.
Der Herr mit Hut ist übrigens der Initiator der Fluxus-Festivität, George Metsionas aus USA. Die musikalische Welt war lange genug im Lot, sagte er sich. Jetzt bundesweit kommt sich auf den Kopf stellen. Je schräger, desto besser. Schräge Musik, sagten sich die Kameraleute, muss man mit den eigenen Waffen schlagen. Was die Dadaisten können, können wir schon lange. Die alte Musik ist zu künstlich, behaupten die Neodadaisten. Wir wollen natürlich sein. So sieht das an der Praxis aus.
By the way, in violin or double bass or poetry or composition. Like these are not. This isn't just like willy-nilly artists who throwing caution to the wind for no reason. Like they're extremely rigorous in their skill.
In zwei Lager. Ein kleines, das Parallelen zieht zu Ionesco und Beckett. Das wesentlich größere Lager zieht aber kurzweg Parallelen zum Zirkus.
So they're all given time intervals to perform in one way that they want to. They're making noise, essentially. She's pulling her cheek, spitting out. The young people always get it. They laugh. Except like It's very serious. This is Ben Patterson
Von
from
Benjamin Patterson
Pennsylvania.
stammen die Variationen für
Virtuoso
Kontrabass.
double bassist who
Anno
toured the U.S. Army,
1962 kommt ein
and he
Bassist
decided
mit
to stay in the
Instrumenten
Rhineland because
nicht
it
mehr
was less
aus.
racist
Er braucht
in the
einen
United
ganzen
States
Koffer
in the
voll
1950s
Physik.
and 60s, and so he was one of the many expatriates there.
Diese Art von Kunst scheint jedenfalls nicht am Hungertuch zu nagen.
Exhausted. So many words, music is taken very seriously, so this was quite a performance for them to pull off. They were in Wiesbaden for
Und jetzt ein
4
Ausschnitt
weekends
aus
in
einer
the
Komposition
museum.
von Emmett Williams. Der Titel: Ein zweifelhaftes Lied in 4 Richtungen für 5 Stimmen.
So they often played a conductor and they would tell each person like they had 2 minutes. So Alison yells out never. This is alphabet symphony. So they're on no or the N word right now, like no,
Wir
never,
hoffen, verehrte
not.
Zuschauer, dass dass Ihnen der tiefere Sinn dieses Opus
And
schon
this,
nach den
just
ersten
because it's
Takten
so
aufgegangen
famous
ist.
in the history of
Wenn
art,
nicht,
is Nam June
trösten
Paik
Sie sich mit
performing
einem Werk
his
von Lamagnan,
Zen for Head.
Komposition
Now,
1960,
Nam
Nummer
June
10.
Paik
Wohlgemerkt,
was in
es handelt
Germany
sich
for graduate school, a doctorate in music and musical theory. And he did finish it, and he will, of course, as I mentioned, go on to become a really important video artist, really pioneer. And he's performing a work called Draw a Straight Line and Follow It. And he decides to use his head and his neck, tie.
Nam June Paik ist zweifellos ein Virtuose auf Tusche und Papierband. Man beachte den
But it
musikalischen
relates to
Hintergrund.
calligraphic painting and Asian practices of beautiful writing and communication and landscape, which is something that's
Nachdem man
also
sich
kind of
bereits
in
so
it.
tief zur Erde niedergelassen hat, können wir dem Finale des Abends gefasst ins Auge sehen.
I'm going to go forward just a little bit, just to show you. Okay, now they're destroying a piano, which is the very last thing. And this is the end of the performance, and they're performing Exit by George Brett. So he's an American artist, he's part of that, so they're done. What was so interesting about this learning of this material, these artists who were so intent on working together collaboratively, writing scores for each other, performing together, having fights and tensions and all sorts of things, but that still, ratified a particular kind of community. One of them that they were able to do and across many different performances during the 1962 to 1963 was to take the Olivetti typewriter, the sort of original ticker tape, if you will, and they would throw the die and come up with 15, 12, 14, etc., and that would tell them what their time interval was for their particular performance, and that's why you have these like scrolls and sheets of paper. I'm just going to show you a few more of the photographs I'm going to talk about one in more detail, but when I was studying Fluxus at UCLA as an undergraduate, I was just struck by women, artists of color, queer artists, and that was monumentally important to me in the 1990s when I was never sort of given any other kind of history than white male European centric history, and it was just a revelation to see what they were doing and why they were doing it, and so this is what sort of drew me into the orbit of Fluxus in general, and then to Alison, because she had such an incredible presence on the stage, but also when I learned of her other works that I'll talk more about. Very briefly, this is a famous work that they performed together. The Stars and Stripes, which is the Army's official newspaper, came and they did a review of the work. There's music and eggs in the air. And one of the cartoons shows, someone shaving a head in this sort of ridiculous characterized way, but by the way, all those things happened in these cartoons in various ways. But Alison and Dick had a very particular kind of performance pairing where they weren't just husband and wife, but they could do things that were intimately presentable, let's say. So for instance, he has a work called Danger Music No. 2 where she shaves his head. Now she can't perform this again, or he can, until his hair grows back. And so they do this a couple of times, and so that's the long distance between the concept of something and then its iteration. And she would do it again in '68, and she would cut other people's hair or shave their head too. But it's this moment of caring and duty and intimacy that I found so interesting about her work. Famously, Make a Salad. This work is probably her best known work, which is why she got that funky headline from the New York Times in her obit about more than whatever. This bothered me quite a bit. This is a book of scores or recipes that she wrote for action for anybody to perform, and one of them is Make a Salad from '62. She had no idea what she was going to do that day. They're riding in a cab together. He said, "What are you going to perform tonight?" She said, "I don't know, maybe I'll make a salad." And so she did. She went to the Coventry and she got a pickle barrel and she put a bunch of fresh ingredients in it, and then she made all the men do the chopping and the cutting, and she had all of these instructions for them to follow. And I loved that, sort of like wresting the space that's traditionally consigned to female labor into the space, not only of representation and performance, but queering in a certain way, those dimensions, those ideas about who's supposed to do what, and who is in charge of certain kinds of, again, labors. So this is a really important one that she will perform. I've seen her perform it many, many times. The last time was in 2019 here in Los Angeles at the LA Philharmonic on the stage, and it was extraordinary. My favorite time was on the rooftop of Aspen Art Museum in Aspen, and it was, incredible. And she has a kit that she works through, like it has to be organic salad, it has to be workers and chefs from that area, it has to be regional. So she had all these ideas. They're so with us today, they're so common about like organic life and environmental consciousness that she really was a pioneer of. So there's Make a Salad again, another one, Nivea cream piece, the Nivea moisturizing cream. These are things she just had on her during this tour of European capitals with this group of people. And Nivea cream piece is to massage your hands, and this she called it a fragrant pig pile, which to me gets to kind of erotics of the score that I talk about in the book, but I'll wait for in case you're interested. But when they return, right? They return home in '63, and this is, you know, a big part of her life. They don't have the same audiences they did in Europe. They're faced with now the rising influence of pop art and minimalism, and they're just kind of lost. Like they don't have the support that they did in Europe for cultural exchanges, especially around new music. So they all sort of start doing their own thing. They stay together for certain performances, especially in Soho, where many of them lived. And this is Alison with Ben Vautier, a French artist, performing someone else's piece, which is around tying. They performed it again inside, outside. And they also performed together by music by Alison, where she's whipping yards of fabric in the air. And this is the larger picture, right? This is the official photograph that was taken by George Muchunas. But I love this photograph so much because I was told by her daughters, was the first to realize that she's pregnant in these performances. And you can sort of see in her maternity gowns, right, and outfits. And it means a lot to me when they tell people this. They say, Nicole knows more about our mom than we do in many ways. And I was so lucky to work with this incredible designer at my press who cut out Ben, which makes me so very happy because it's about her, and it's about her relationship to all these other factions and people that she adored. But in some cases, around this time, after she had her daughters, her twin daughters, one is an incredible intermediate artist, Jessica Higgins, her other daughter, the other twin, Hannah Higgins is an art historian at UIC, and they are just really amazing women, and they learned so much, I think, from being artists' children. Now, what I want to start to, the beyond in my title is Alison Knowles in and out of Fluxus. So the last two chapters are her out of Fluxus. And it's her work on her own, in her own, not just in her own capacities as a visual artist, but how she's really redefining a number of different genres, including around language and books and bookmaking. This is a very famous work of hers called The Big Book, which no longer exists, and I'll describe why. It was made in their home, in their Chelsea home in New York City. It was made under the imprint of their press that they founded together, she and Dick Something Else Press, which was an incredibly important publishing house for reissuing works of the avant-garde, of Gertrude Stein, of all sorts of different things people hadn't seen in a really long time or read. Were able to, stuff that had happened right in that moment. So it was this incredible press house that because Dick Higgins' family had money, they were able to live on that inheritance for a good while. So you can see from this work, The Big Book, is that it's a sort of constellation of ideas about what a book can and should be. And all of those, it's 8 pages, right, total, but it's around a steel spine that opened. And it's interactive. So those scores that she was writing for interactivity, for us to make a salad, for us to engage, here she made an actual sort of play space of imaginative, episodic novels like hers she learned with her dad, right? To go through, like Alison's Adventures in Wonderland, a different kind of experience. Now this is very briefly a film that Dick shot in their home of The Big Book as she was working on it. It's silent, but she had, I'll just talk a little bit over it, and you can watch it as I talk. It was first shown in Toronto, and then in Chicago, which I'll talk about, and then here at UC San Diego, and at the Jewish Museum, where it all fell apart, and she said, leave it, I don't want it anymore. And that was Alison's MO for her whole life. If she was done with something, she was done with something. And here I am chasing her down and saying, don't throw things away, keep them for people like me, and just fell in the hole. She would disagree heartily with that. But what you're seeing, and I'm going to move it a little bit, hopefully you can see the girls in these clips, but she had doors and windows for entering and exiting, but it was non-linear. You could sort of go in at any point that you wanted to, but there was a portal, an official portal that you would ideally go through, a grass tunnel. It was lit around it. It also played an audio collage of the sounds of its own making, meaning that she recorded the construction of this the whole time, and then she played it during it. So you're sort of in this space, ideally, of this book, and then you are also hearing the sounds of how it was made. One of my favorite stories is that her daughters played through with it all the time, which is very sweet. And it became a really important pioneering work of installation art, which did not exist yet before people like Alison. So I'm going to jump ahead. Because it was this incredibly new work, and because Alison and Dick lived in this nexus of criticality in New York City and Lower Manhattan, where they had artists, designers, and performers and musicians just constantly coming through, their writers, theater, critics, poets, etc., coming through their house, this work became, people saw it. They would just come over and see it in their home. And one of them, in fact, was one of the founding directors and curators at the Museum of Contemporary Art in Chicago, Jan van der Mark. And van der Mark saw it in their house and said, this has to be in the show. The show I'm conceiving for the very first exhibition at MCA, pictures to be read, poetry to be seen. And these are some of the press photos. This is an AP Wire photo, and this is from the Chicago Tribune, where you can see her living and sort of experiencing the book and showing people what to do with it. Now, one thing she disliked very much in a museum presentation was that they wouldn't let you touch it. The whole point was to let people touch it, let children play. But, understandably so, there's insurance purposes and issues, and there's things about kids hurting themselves on ladders, and then she thought, oh, it's become a museum object. That's exactly what I didn't want it to be. But, here we are, and she worked with it. People stole items from it all the time, by the way. So here's enter here, here's the second space. She signed it, her letters. She had a goat gallery, a mountain goat gallery. She took a print of a mountain goat and she mailed it to friends, and she said, bring it back, send me whatever you want to do with it. And then they did, and so this is the goat gallery. The very important critic Harold Rosenberg, when he reviewed this for The New Yorker in 1967, said, audio, visual, kinetic, mobile, structural, electrified landscape. Wow. What a compliment to give to an artist who was once a painter who was bored by her own paintings, essentially. There was a chemical toilet. There was a working stove. There was a place for aspirin and cigarettes and food. And there's a couple of the other, you can see, iterations in Toronto, Chicago, and the University of California when she was about to be on staff at CalArts, and I'll talk about that in just a minute too. So monumentally scaled ideas, language. This is the time of her life when she got into First Nations and Indigenous poetry. She was working a lot with the sacred ideas and spirituality, the poetics of the everyday, as she called it. This is the time when she begins to think about her role as a mother, her life in this art world, which is really complicated and sexist and troubling in many senses. But there was always, what I appreciate so much about her is that there was this element of play, always. That she didn't sort of lose that idea of whimsy, which is, to me, what episodic novels give us. They give us this idea, this entrance into this whole other place of time and experience, and that's what you have here. So kids playing through it, which is always my favorite. Things were purloined, as I mentioned. Things were substituted when it showed up or when it was finished at the Jewish Museum in 1969. It was barely a shell of what it had been before. And what I also deeply appreciated about Alison all the time was not just that she would remake this into a series of trilogies and forms, right? This is the boat book from 2015, dedicated to her brother, who was a fisherman on Long Island. This very intimate work that is about, that sort of not just the nautical theme, but there's photographs and pictures certainly, but magazines and letters and all this stuff that sort of she's cataloging. She's an archaeologist of the everyday. She's constantly collecting things and putting them in her work. And sometimes it looks chaotic. Like sometimes it looks like, what am I looking at here, Alison? And you're trying to sort of pick apart, and then you realize that sort of overwhelming experience is kind of the point. But she was very curious and to make her work expandable in such a way that it wasn't just for the sighted. So in a certain time in her life, in the 1980s, she began to work with the blind, and she made a miniature piece. This is the finger book of ancient languages, and you can see that she's made the miniaturized scale of the big book, but has braille, and you can manipulate it and read it, and she's thinking about what it means, and it's in a foldable case, this giant like drum, circular drum, and so circles are really important, and I talk about in her work, but I don't bore you too much with that now. But let me just say that this work was so foundational and so radical for its time. It was featured in a Newsweek article in 1968, and the caption was Knowles reshaping the book for post-literate man. And it was this moment where she realized that the experiential was being privileged over the textual. And that was okay for her, and this is something that she very much wanted, and so she pursued this kind of connection between visual poetry and the space of exhibition and play. It's a child's chair. You know, there's all these sort of moments of her life that are here, domestic themes, etc. I'm going to quickly go through the last example because this is chapter 5. It's the longest chapter in the book. It's my favorite chapter because it was such a hard one to write. It wasn't my favorite for a long time, but it has since become my favorite because it's this labor of love that I remember writing when my daughter was a newborn and holding her and trying to type with one hand and trying to understand what this was. And well, I'll just briefly say this is probably, besides Make a Salad and the Big Book, her most well-known and cited work, and it is a computer-generated poem. Probably, we don't know for sure, but among, we can say, confidently, the first ever computer-generated poems. And it came from a living room seminar where she had John Cage, Nam June, James Tenney, who was an experimental composer, in her house, and he was teaching them about electronic music processing, about computation, and then she makes it into a three-dimensional sculpture. So A House of Dust, in quotation marks, is the poem. The House of Dust, italicized, is the title of the sculpture. So it's a chapter of two different things, if you will, that are related. This is what the computer program looks like. This is James Tenney working in IBM in Brooklyn, the Brooklyn Polytechnic. And he's there, he's a computer whiz, but he's also an experimental musician. And he's trying to describe that their use of chance and indeterminacy and different experiences would actually mimic how we generate material through computers and data sets. And so he basically asked all of them to put together a project, and she did. She put together 4 different lists. I'm going to show you what it looks like. So this is the computer program, what it looks like with all the alphanumeric stuff that I don't understand, I promise. I've tried for a really long time. It's written in Fortran, which is one of the earliest computational languages, but Fortran was used for measuring statistics of weather, thermodynamics, and lots of different data sets that were unruly. And that's why she loved it so much, and that's why she asked Tenney to help her write this work, which she also considered a score. Now, this poem, it consists of 4 lists. And the 4 lists she gave was a house, so a house of something, among, in some place, right? Using what? Certain kind of lighting conditions, and then the inhabitants. And this was the list that she came up with, and when it spits it out in this completely evocative, sometimes ridiculous, sometimes really practical modes for living. And you can see here, one of them says, a house of tin in a hot climate, using candles, inhabited by lovers. A house of glass in a green mossy terrain, using natural light, inhabited by people who sleep all the time, etc., etc. And it takes a foot, it's like this big of, I think it's over a foot, of computer printout before a single stanza repeats. So this idea that she could sort of short circuit her work, she could let the computer do the chants for us, which I should probably update this chapter in the age of AI in some ways, but that's another long thing to come. But this is how it's presented now. So when you would visit Alison, as I did, she would have boxes of these things, and as a parting gift, she'd rip them off and give them to you. I was like, these are artworks, Alison. These go in museums. It's okay. I'm like, no, and she would sign it just to make it really clear that she didn't care that she was giving something, which I always felt, again, so dear about it. But it's an old computer with the sprockets, you know, how I learned computing when I was a kid, and it just spits and spits and spits, and it has this huge pile along the floor, which is really a lovely image. But out of that pile, out of those stanzas, she selected one to make a three-dimensional sculpture out of, and I'm going to hurry up on this last one. Am I okay?
You're good.
Okay. These are color slide plastic models for the House of Dust environments. Ooh. These were slides that I found in an unmarked envelope, again, in the Getty Research Library, not in Dick Higgins' papers, not in Alison's papers, not in Jean Brown, who's the major collector of Fluxus work, but in the EAT technology records. And then I realized that she'd asked for money and asked for technological assistance, and so then I had to write a whole other section on the chapter. In any case, these were what she imagined the environments could be, but which environment did she choose exactly? I also had to figure that out because she couldn't remember. Of course, this is a long time ago, and nobody bothered to write it down, so then I had to do all the digging to figure out that it's this one. A house of plastic in a metropolis using natural light, inhabited by people from all walks of life. I mean, it's just so lovely. And she made it and asked for it to be sited on a Chelsea, on the land, if you will, of a housing co-op, the Ladies International Garment Workers. They had just come, she lived in Chelsea and it was not far from her, and she had to work for a year with land management, she had to work with the city, she had to work with architects, she had to do all these things, and the residents hated it, absolutely hated it, and they burned it. No. They burned it. This is fiberglass. It's made of fiberglass. But what I wanted to point out is that those bumps that are on the shapes, these irregular kind of strange amoebic shapes, biomorphic shapes, those are a sound installation that records the rising and the setting of the sun. So when you're in it, it has this murmuring sound that will be, it sort of has this varying pitches that she wanted to, and she loved that kids played on it. Until they didn't. Until they say, so what happens to it? She gets a job at CalArts. CalArts just opened in 1970, and they're on by the way, in Burbank, on a former Catholic school girls' campus, and before it moves to Valencia, and it's there for a year, and she's hired by Alan Cabral, very famous, happenings performer who's the dean there, and he hires all of our artist friends. But because she has this training and background in graphic design, she runs the very first graphic prints lab there, and because she's very savvy, she asks for the remake of the work from Chelsea to be re-dipped in fiberglass and sent to CalArts. That was part of her contract. Good for her. Like, I am amazed at that fortitude to even ask. She didn't think they were gonna, she told me, I didn't think they were gonna do it. She said, well, you always have to ask, Nicole, ask all the time. So she decides to use a new selected stanza from the poem, A House of Dust on Open Ground, using natural light, inhabited by friends and enemies, which is great for college campus. The House of Dust poem in progress was the site of many, many moments for student life. So Alison performed there. She also gave assignments to her students to come up with things there. Many of them came up with things like daily yoga activities or film events inside. As you can see, it was eventually moved to Valencia. And then in the 1970s, another earthquake cracked down the center, the big one, and so it was just sort of discarded. But the little one lives on in a daycare in Santa Clara. But anyway, so you see some photos. This is the archive I had to find. CalArts did not have anything a session that had anything organized. I had to find my way through this work too and figure out what she was doing. And one of the most important works that came out of this was this famous poem drop. And this is a work that she collaborated with two students, Norman Kaplan and Richard Banks. The computer poem drop event over the House of Dust was covered by the LA Times. It was on the nightly news on Channel 5, Channel 11, Channel 13. And what essentially it is she selected another stanza, and she wrote these postcards to friends of photographs of the House of Dust in various iterations. And essentially, she got money from the Critical Studies program to get a helicopter to fly over from Burbank and drop that box of poems into the air. And she conducted it through the channel radio on the ground. it's pretty extraordinary. Alan Capro, and I will show you this just very quickly because this is also something that was unmarked in the Getty files. I was like, hold on a second. This is incredible. So this is Alan Capro's Super 8 film. Thank you. It's so funny. I think I'm so glad you got.
Oh my God.
Super 8mm film, The Poem Drop Over the House of Dust. She said it was like pages flying in the air, that, of course, but that also dropped on heads and, you know, felt very like beautiful and moving to her. And of course it's sort of funny and everyone's staring up at it and things are sort of flying down on them. This is one of the photographs from the still.
Oh, wow.
They took. It's extraordinary. But I also want to say in this moment, it's not just the work and the aesthetics of computer-generated poetry and environmental scale, and her work as a teacher. This is her pedagogical work too. She's merging her artistic life with her teaching life, which is so important. But we have to remember the context in which these poems were dropped. This is the era of Vietnam War. This is the first helicopter war, the first television war, the first living room war, where every night you could turn on the television and you would see the sounds of helicopters thumps and dropping supplies to American soldiers, bombs to the Viet Cong, certainly propaganda materials as well. And these are things that she knew and she was very much interested in and became more invested in because her students were becoming more and more activist. And they were demanding answers of the institutions in which they were working and living and operating under: political, economic, social, cultural. And so this is why this particular chapter in the book is meaningful to me. They all are, but this particular, because I realize her politics are so subtle. These are gesturing toward conversations without sort of beating you on the head with it, which I found so important. And this is Los Angeles. This is the site of student activism. This are anti-war demonstrations in East Los Angeles, organized by the Chicano Moratorium Committee. This is the Angry Arts Against the War Peace Walk. Her work then, in this moment, to choose the helicopter, to work with her students who were saved from Vietnam because they were in college. That she knew that, and she understood that she had a stake in what was happening to them in their lives, and she wanted to bring some kind of gesture and awareness to it. And then I'll just show you 2 more slides of these events with her students. She often just gave them full reign to organize things. Like this is the evening concert event where the music department would invite visiting faculty and their students just to play around the House of Dust. There's a printing event. The printmakers would make these works and they would use it as an exhibition space. The pig roast event, where they did have this day-long, it's sort of complicated relationship to gifting and rituals and Native American poetics that she was studying at the time. But in any case, so these are convivial and they're exciting. This exhibition space and even the House of Dust, so inside were films. It was also called the House of Lust by the students. Because illicit activities are happening in there as well. And she heard about it and laughed and she said, well, of course it is, of course it is. She was completely okay with that. The last image I want to leave you on is a performance from this moment at Cal Arts. She leaves in 72. The earthquake at Newhall in 71 really does spook her a little bit, and so she decides to leave, but she sort of leaves her teaching life behind too. She misses New York. She's a native New Yorker, and so the loft that I showed you at the beginning that was in that New York Times photograph is where she lived until she passed away at Soho Loft on Spring and Prince Street since 1972. But one of the last parting sort of gifts, if you will, was this work called 99 Red North, which was a computer-generated set of instructions that she would organize on the ground. And so you can see like circles, like all the numbers that came up generated by this set of instructions that she gave it. And this is called Apple, the 99 Red North, or the Apple event. And she put all these apples down, and she asked them to take an apple and leave something behind. So you take an apple, and somebody left their keys. And I used to look at this photograph for a little bit. Leave their keys, they're stuck without their car for a long time. Well, it was Matt Mulligan, who is a very famous conceptual artist today, who is at Cal Arts at the time, and those were his keys. I'm very certain about this. And then they would decay. And one thing that I want to close on, and I'm happy to answer any questions about Alison and a number of different other aspects I brought, is the theme of time in her work. The theme of entropy, certainly, but time, the precious time that we have together, the moments of time that we have to make, to write, to work, to think, to make things better, to make the world better, and to have these connections with students and friends and collaborators her entire life right up to the end. I think is a really beautiful legacy, and so I'll just leave it at that. I'm happy to answer any questions you have them. Thank you so much.
All right, folks, before we transition into Q&A, I am going to kindly remind everybody that we are video recording the event, so we are going to ask for people to use a microphone to ask their question. There's a microphone, if you're on that side of the room, there's a microphone stand on that side. If you're on this side, I'll be happy to walk this microphone over to you. I think I saw a hand raised in the back.
So, you said that she would get rid of her things in her art.
Yes.
And I'm a studio arts major. I get borderline hoarding with it,
Mm-hmm.
and there's a lot of, if I were to give things away, there's kind of thoughts of, not regret, but wishing you had that.
Mm-hmm.
Did she ever express not regret, but being oh, I wish I had something that I had, gotten rid of or decided I was done with? How can someone be so definitively done with something?
That's a wonderful question, and I never really got a good answer out of it from her, because I'm not like that at all. Daughter in the back of the room, I have everything she's ever had since the time she's ever made anything. I have probably 85,000 photos of her on my phone. I am the exact opposite of that, and it's probably the historian in me, right? It's the person that wants to save everything to do the detective work. I think Alison, from all of our conversations, was just very, not only was she a practicing Zen Buddhist, she truly believed in this idea of shedding things from our world that mean really nothing to us in the end, that really it's this right now, me and you, and in this room that means more than, our graded, conversations together, for instance. At least some of my students. But I think that a couple times I would ask her, I said, Alison, why did you do that? Why did you do that? Why did you arrange? She said, she would always sort of blow it off, but one day we did have a really long conversation about it. And she said, I felt weighted down by things that I could know. It's not that I didn't find them interesting anymore. I just felt weighted down, that was another version of me. Mm-hmm. And that I was happy to sort of give that version away, or I was happy to sort of let that version not have a kind of space for me anymore. She was really good about shedding. She's unsentimental. She's the most lovely and generous person, but she's also deeply kind of unsentimental in certain kind of ways. But then you go into her bathroom and she's got pictures of her children and all these things. So there's moments when I realized she did preserve certain things. So it's not that she didn't keep everything, she just didn't think of museums. She didn't think of collectors. She didn't think of me or curators or art historians. She wasn't interested in being written about. Which it's such a great question, because other women artists of this era were. Carola Schneemann, Charlotte Worman, they kept everything. And they kept everything because they had history in mind. And they said, I've got to keep every single thing so some historian comes after me someday, in a good way, is trying to follow me and they have a path. So both ways are good, I think, right? But she did make it really hard for me to do this work. But yeah, that's the best I can say. She just wasn't thinking, she didn't care about that status level of art history. And I should also say, unlike many contemporary artists that you work on, regardless of age, and I don't want to generalize too much, but many of their studios, especially, famous ones, will ask to see anything that you write before they allow you to have rights and reproductions. I've known Alison for 20 years. I never showed her a single page. The first time she ever saw anything related to this book was when she was dying. And she was, looking through the pages and said, Nicole, you did good. So.
I'm curious if she ever kind of spoke to the male ego that she was witness to or had to be kind of victim to in her time. Mm-hmm. Also just more about her relationship with Dick and how that came to be. And like in the opposite sense, if she was ever expressed any gratitude, because I know in your classes and just in the beginning of your talk, you had spoke to kind of the patriarchy having a role in women getting their flowers in the arts in the first place. So I wonder if she ever spoke to that at all.
She did quite a bit. I'll start with the second question about Dick and Alison. I'm actually writing a paper right now called Intimacy in the Archive, the case of Dick and Alison. And it's a presentation I'm going to give at CAA this year too, and I'm hoping to turn into something with a person who's writing on Dick Higgins. Her dissertation, we're going to try to do something together. Where I'm from Alison and she's from, Dick. Alison was married in the 1950s to a minister's son, Episcopal minister's son. And she, he was a social worker and he agreed that she could be an artist. And then at a certain point, didn't like it. Didn't like that they lived in, Soho sounds so fancy now, but it wasn't in the 1950s. And he didn't like living in, a ramble-shacked four-floor walk-up, And he didn't like that she was gone a lot. He didn't like that she was working during the day and then taking classes at Pratt at night to finish. He didn't like, so she immediately realized this, and he had agreed not to have children. And then he didn't. And so she realized really early on that this was not going to work for her and the life that she imagined for herself, and that was encouraged by people like her parents, her dad especially. Her mom wanted her to be a little more traditional than she was. So they get divorced, and she meets Dick at a party thrown by an artist named Ray Johnson, very famous artist, Dorothy Podbear. And she describes it, and I describe it in the book, and she says, it was an evening, an apartment of all gay men. And I felt at home, I felt sweet, talked about all of these different things, life, politics. This is late 50s. And this was Dick's apartment, turned out to be Dick's apartment. So she just sort of shows up with a friend of hers who they meet, and Dick gets a little scared because it's getting a little rowdy. He lives on Christopher Street in Greenwich Village, and by this time he was heavily policed by anti-gay lesbian police forces, quite literally. This is why Stonewall and all these things happen in Greenwich Village. So they know that. They know that they're kind of putting themselves in a dangerous position, and it gets too loud and too late, and he hides under the bed. The cops come, everybody leaves, luckily nobody gets arrested, but she basically finds him, and she gets under the bed and starts talking to him, and she stays for 3 days. And in that moment, a couple of things are coming together. She's realizing, oh, he's so fun. She thought they were going to be best friends, and they were truly for their whole lives. Best friends. Dick came from a very wealthy industrialist family in Massachusetts, Steele family. He was expected to marry and to have children and to, do all the things that the 1% just expect their progeny. And he wasn't going to do that. And so so when he got with Alison and he started writing these letters to his dad about Alison, they got very excited, and he thought, oh, great. So they kind of hatched a plan, right? This is perfect for both of us. We can have this life together. And what I've always admired about them is that there was genuine love and compassion and companionship. And they, as Dick famously said, we let the plumbing work itself out. Wow. The plumbing did, because she got pregnant and had her twins, and they were incredible co-parents. Now, there were moments that were rough, and her career escalated and his didn't. And there was some ugly letters between the two of them about parenting and childhood. And that's when I think Alison realized, I'm never going to get married again. Because if this perfect person for me is being really shitty as soon as I get successful, because he's not right now in his life, then it's not something I'm going to sort of pursue. And she didn't. Now they break up in 70, so they're not together. They're together, not together at CalArts. They officially divorced at that time, but they get back together in 1984 in an open marriage. And they had this incredible, he had partners, she had partners, and everybody had this kind of an incredible 20th century family love story. Now, the reason why I tell you all of that is to answer your first question, which is she was very upset that she had to get her father's permission to go to Wiesbaden when she's now been married twice, right? And why would she need her father's permission to go to Wiesbaden? Like she's like, I'm an independent person. My dad supported my college degrees. Why is he asking for something like this? So what she realized, I think, along the way was that there was limits, certainly, that patriarchy hurts everybody, essentially. It doesn't just hurt women, it hurts men too. And because it creates these conditions of expectation. And that's what she fought against over and over and over again. And one reason she loved John Cage was because John Cage and his partner, lifelong partner Merce Cunningham, were this incredible vision of love that didn't play those particular kind of relationship games, if you will. So in her life, she mostly surrounded herself with men who were very, very supportive. And the time that she became the most frustrated by patriarchy was actually at Cal Arts with Judy Chicago and Miriam Shapiro, who were running the very first ever feminist art program there, and they refused to let her work. She's on faculty, she's a peer of theirs, and they refused to let her participate in their program because she works with men.
What?
And this is something she's mad about for a decade, because she would tell me, she's like, who else was I supposed to work with? Like, that's all there was. I had to get permission for my, kind of thing. So yes, I think she was very frustrated by a lot of it, and she purposely surrounded herself by people who were supportive in every kind of capacity, men especially, and if they weren't, she discarded them. To this question, well then we can't really be friends anymore. Yeah. Is that okay? Bye. Or am I running out of time?
We have time for one more question. Okay. It's coming in from Zoom.
Okay.
It's coming in from Zoom.
Professor Woods, we have a question from one of our online audience members, and Barry writes, what has been the most challenging and the most rewarding thing about writing the book, Developing Performing Chance?
Oh gosh. The most, well, it was, so I'm a modern and contemporary art historian, which means I work on living and dead artists. And that moment of like realizing that I was working on somebody whom I felt this sort of connection with, and I thought her work was really interesting, but I didn't always love the work, actually. I didn't love every work I ever made, she ever made. I didn't love that. But I thought, this is a challenge to me. You have to write about things. If you're going to be a good critic, you have to understand why you don't like it, or why you're not sort of completely sold on it. And so as a scholar, as a critic, I'm sure this is looking here, as scholars and a critic, one of the most enjoyable things about that writing process was to work that out from my own sort of critical capacity as a person who's doing this deep, intense archival research, which is one of the other things I really loved about it, actually, was all that research I sort of complained about. I loved every minute of it. I got on a plane every time I could. I am an absolute nerd. I love boxes and cold, freezing, like, libraries, and cutting my fingers on, paper clips and all the things. Like, I'm absolutely an archive hound, so I really loved that. But I love the challenge that the work presented to me. Because this is not hagiography, this is not, everything this isn't just like a celebration. This is ideally not just putting on record for the first time her life and work, and expanding it in ways that I could possibly contribute to the history of art, but also challenging myself to do something really, really hard and to get great satisfaction from that, even if it took an exceptionally long time. It's my fault for that. Book number 2 is not going to take that long, because I know what I'm doing now. Honestly, that's the other real truth to it. Once you do something the first time, it's so hard, and then when you do it again, you think, oh, these are all the shortcuts. This is what I can do. I don't have to, kill myself every day. So yeah, I hope that answered the question. Yeah. Can we just take one more from my student?
Absolutely.
Okay, Annalise, you have the last word. Thank you, Rick.
So my question is, I wrote it down. But so did she have some sort of classification of how she would describe her art pieces? Like, you called this one a performance, and you called her salad making one a performance and stuff like that. But this one feels, although I don't know if it was you or her that considered this one a performance, but it feels pretty similar to the book one, and how over time it would kind of decay and change and eventually fall apart, as I'm sure this one did, but did she have some sort of line between what at one point in time might feel pretty fixed?
Yes.
Versus she did.
Absolutely excellent question, and it's a complicated concept, which is why I sort of slid over. So I'm glad that you asked me because it takes up, quite a bit of ink in the book, which is her husband Dick theorized something called intermedia, and intermedia is a concept that blends together all the sort of disciplinary apparatus, if you will. So music, poetry, all the rules, if you will, of music, of poetry, of art making, of theater writing, etc., that it would, if they could sort of undo the ways in which they've been trained in this sort of super academic way, and whatever that might be, and to take in other influences. So if you're a visual artist, you could be a poet. If you're a poet, you could be an architect. If you're an architect, you could be a painter. If you're a painter, you could be a designer. And that was a really important concept to all of these artists at this time. And he was the first to theorize it, and it's actually based on a Samuel Taylor Coleridge idea about intermedia, which is interdisciplinarity, is the shortcut way to describe. But yes, her classes at CalArts were called intermedia. Like that was the title of the class, was intermedia studies, and it could thus then gave them this wide berth to not just make a number of different kinds of artworks, but that they had to be rigorous. So intermedia is not just anything goes and it can be sloppy. It can be sloppy, you want it to be sloppy, but you have to want it to be sloppy, right? Like you have to want it to be certain kinds of things. And so they never got rid of the rigor or the intellectual capacity of the conceptual work that they were traveling through, if you will, kind of these journeys, I should say. So performance is a big term, conceptual art's a big term, but what she followed through to the end is intermedia. And he publishes on it, and they have an entire exhibition in their house called Intermedia. So it's this through line through all of their practices. But that's the sort of the short, like the nuts and bolts really fast. So definitely it's interdisciplinarity. If that's the best, if I can say it that way, soup to nuts real fast. Yeah.
All right, everyone, can you please help me thank
Yes.
Dr. Nicole